Hello and welcome to our second class on Fredric Bastiat's The Law. Today we will begin to take a closer look at what Bastiat's seminal work based upon his theory of economics and government has to say. So Bastiat starts with the premise, or with explaining where our rights come from. So he begins by explaining what life is. He says, what is life? And Bastiat says that life is a gift from God. Okay, it is a gift from God. And it is a gift from God that includes three things. It includes the physical, it includes the intellectual, and of course the spiritual or moral. And these gifts from God that constitute our life, we must understand from the purpose of the idea that God has put us here to honor, obey, and love Him, so that way we can be happy with Him in the next life. This is the very premise of where Bastiat starts. Without that premise, nothing of what he says would hold up. He is holding that premise out as opposed to the premise of what someone like Karl Marx would hold out, in that we are all just material beasts. We are all just material things, okay? Throwing out the intellectual and the moral. We are just material beasts here for material gain, and that would take us in a very different direction for how we should behave as a collective group. But Bastiat says we are creatures of God. And God gave us faculties, okay? Spiritual, mental, and physical faculties. Can't spell today. Gave us faculties. These faculties God gave us in order for us to be able to use the natural resources of the world. Okay? He gave us these faculties in order for us to be able to use the natural resources that are given to us. And remember, when Bastiat was writing this book in 1850, 49, 48, America was still, although somewhat in its infancy, was now developing as a nation. And although the people who first came over to America were looking for different kinds of natural resources, they were looking for gold, silver, precious metals. And although on the East Coast especially there was not any of those metals in abundance, America was full of natural resources. We are a country that is very rich in natural resources, and we were beginning to really start to make use of those natural resources in the 1800s, and especially with the industrial boom that was later to occur. So Bastiat says we have been given these faculties by God in order to use them, apply them to the natural resources, and from that combination, okay, from that combination, if we make this a plus sign here, we get products, okay? Goods, we can make things. We make things today like computers, video cameras, smartphones, tablets. We make furniture, automobiles. Now, God has given us our life, our faculties, and the ability to produce things. Okay? And this converts to This is maybe better explained by 3 words. And those 3 words are life, liberty, and property. And Bastiat would say that we have these gifts given from God, life, liberty, and property, and we have the natural right to be able to defend those things. Every individual has the right to defend his life, liberty, and property. That is the basis, the foundation upon which Bastiat is going to now build the rest of his economic and governmental theory for us. Okay? Now, what is the next logical question here for us is, how can men go about protecting these things? Because it is not okay for one man, one individual, to use force against another individual. We would say that would be wrong. But then, if someone, though, however, does that, if someone tries to use force to take away the life, liberty, or property of another individual, what does that mean for the individual against whom the attack is being made? Well, that individual does have the right to defend their life, liberty, or property. But if every individual person, man or woman, had to worry about defending their own life, liberty, and property from every other person, no one could live in a civilization or in a society together. So to overcome that, instead of it being an anarchy with no rules and no government, where people are out just for themselves, people want to live together. God created man as a social being. We are social animals. That is true. We live together. We work together. God wants us to. In order to do that peacefully and in a civilized manner, as part of a civilization, we have to have the ability to have some type of governing structure to keep order and peace in society. How do we go about doing that? What is that? Well, we have to start with the premise that we have to have rules. We have to have rules, okay? And those rules we call laws. So, Bastiat's book is called The Law. So what is Bastiat's definition of what the law is? What is the law? Well, before we define it, let's take one step back. We were talking about individuals using their own powers to defend their life, liberty, and property. Well, if a civilization is to occur, if a society is to occur, that means you have a group of individuals. And in which case, the group would want to come up with a way to protect their collective life, liberty, and properties. Okay? Those are collective rights. Collective rights meaning that men have the right to organize and protect all of their common rights. So collective rights. Put that on here as CR. Collective rights. Meaning that people have the right to organize and protect their common rights. Organize being the key word. Okay? If an individual has the right to defend their property, let's say that you have in the early periods of civilization, people move into, many times they'll live in areas where there's water. And so someone builds a house not too far from a large body of water, could be a major river. In the Mediterranean, you would have had civilizations growing up around the Nile River, the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, for example. And if someone were to build their home near the one of these rivers, they would have the right, if someone else were to come in and attack them, to defend their home. Okay? And eventually people realize, though, groups of people can overpower an individual. So there might be a group of people who get together and attack that individual and take over their home. So the individual who owns the home says, I can't defend myself if a bunch of people come and attack. I need to join forces with other people. So he goes to other people living along the river and says to them, we should band together to protect our properties. And I promise that if someone attacks you, I'll come to your aid and you'll come to my aid. And eventually, people start to live together and they grow into small villages and towns and cities. And eventually, cities start to merge together and become larger and larger. Then you get city-states. And from there, you get countries. Okay? And that is the organization, in a nutshell, the organization by peoples to protect their rights. But they need to do that in an organized manner because, remember, we started with the premise that these are rights given to man by God. Okay? These were not rights created by government and given to man. We have to keep that very steady in our minds, the order of this. So God has given us certain faculties, life, liberty, property, gifts from God. We then call these, in the United States, especially with the Constitution and our Founding Fathers, they call these rights natural rights, all right? Because there are two different ways that we can view and see God. That is through nature. We can see God's order in nature and creation in nature, and there's certain rules that run through nature, those natural rights. And this is where the idea of natural rights comes from, that there's a certain order to the world, to the universe, that was created by God. And that order that's in the universe also applies to man's relationships with each other. Okay? Not just to the universal laws of gravity or the constant of the speed of light, but also to man's relationship to each other. And these natural rights given by man include life, liberty, and property. And as such, are part of the natural order that God has put together in the universe, and that's why they're called natural rights. We also know that there's supernatural things that have been given to us by God, His graces, and other ways that He has explained to us the way that He has created the great and wonderful existence that we have. Some of those things we can't necessarily understand, but we're focusing more upon the natural order of things that God has created, and that's why the name natural rights comes up. The idea that all men are imbued or equally given these natural rights. That doesn't mean that all men are equal, and that's one thing that we need to be very careful of to understand, is that although our Constitution may say that all men are created equal, that doesn't mean that all men are equal, or all men and women are equal. We have different gifts. God gives us different things that we can excel in, some things that we do not excel so well in. By equal, that means, though, that we all have certain things given to us by God, gifts from God, our lives, our liberties, and our property. Okay, that would be the argument that Bastiat makes, that those are the things that make us all equal. And we all have the same rights in those things. Okay, doesn't mean we all have the same amount of property. Okay, but what property we do have, we have a right to protect. So groups would get together to protect these properties. So by using what we would call group force or a common force to protect their property, okay, that is how governments are formed. And that's why you need laws, because you need rules for how are these groups going to enforce the laws. Even in the example that I gave earlier, we have this one family going to another family and saying, if someone attacks you, we'll come help you. If someone attacks us, you can come and help us. There's a rule right there, right? The mutuality of helping each other if either one is attacked. All right? So those rules are what we call laws. So the law is the organization there's that word again, because that's what we're doing. We're organizing, putting together in an orderly fashion, just like God created the universe with order in it. Man needs to, when he creates his laws, needs to also follow that pattern. We need to learn from God. The organization of the natural right to lawful defense. Notice that the word is defense. Okay, the word is not to take away or to force. Okay. In fact, Bastiat calls that, when that happens, when you have a group of people who go and take away the life, liberty, or property of another individual or another group, the perversion of force. Okay, the perversion of force is using common force. Okay, using common force to take away the rights. These are the rights here. Okay, of another group. That's the perversion of force. Lawful force, lawfully defending one's property, life, and liberty is fine. We have the individual right. We can, as a group, decide to have the collective right as well. But now notice what's happened here. God has given the rights to man. Man has therefore designated a government to protect those rights. The rights aren't flowing from the government to man. Man is giving the right to the government to help protect his rights, and therefore has the ability to take that back again. Okay? Take that back again and not stay with a form of government that perverts or otherwise tramples upon other people's or that man's or woman's rights. Now, however, the organization of lawful defense to protect the life, liberties, and properties is a privilege, okay? And with that privilege comes responsibility. People must take responsibility for their actions and for their government. That's why even learning about governmental entities is an important thing. This is not something that any people are going to say, well, it's not really important to me. I don't plan to get into politics. Everybody, because God gives you your life, your liberties, your property, and everything else that you have, and you have a right to those, if you want those things protected, if you don't want those things taken away, then you need to learn, and you need to protect, and you need to defend them. And so every person has that duty to defend their life, liberty, and property, defend the property of those that they are combined with. In other words, if you live in a society or a group and you allow other people just to take care of all of that for you, and you don't have any put any work at all into protecting life, liberties, and your properties, then don't be surprised if those life, liberty, and properties get taken away by the other people, because you're not willing to put any effort at all into it. That doesn't mean that you have to go and get involved and run for office, although that would be a good thing. But it does mean that you should at least be aware of the issues that are out there. Make sure you go out and vote when it's time for elections. Those things are important. Be involved in the political process because it allows the protection of your rights, and you can make sure that the people who are getting elected aren't trampling upon your rights, and if they are, then you can do something about it. Okay? But it's a privilege, it's a responsibility that we all have, okay, to take care of the gifts given to us from God. What is the purpose behind the law? This may be the definition of law, but what's the purpose of law? The purpose of law is to maintain justice. Now, notice that purpose of the law. Justice is a virtue, but the law is not a living, thinking being. So law is only focused upon the virtue of justice. That doesn't mean that judges, people who have to enforce the law, can't have mercy. They can. But the law in and of itself is focused only upon the justice end of things. Okay? If you do something wrong, here's the punishment for it. Here are the rules. Do not break the rules. Okay? If a law limits and destroys rights, okay, if the organization of the natural right to lawful defense of life, liberty, and property, so we're defending our rights, if the law does anything, okay, to limit or destroy those rights, then the law in and of itself is destroying its own objective. And its own objective or purpose is to maintain justice. So if the law is taking away rights from one group and giving them to another, the law is destroying the very thing that it was created to do. That is to maintain justice, because that's not justice. The law, government does not have the right to decide. It wants to take, you have too much, I'm going to take some away from you and I'm going to give it to you. And it doesn't matter who that person is. The person could be over here, could be very wealthy, and over here very poor. The person over here could be very poor, and you could take away from them and give it to someone else because we like this person more. That happens too, right? You say, well, you may not be a super rich person, but we don't like you very much because you voted against us. So we're going to take your stuff and we're going to give it to this group over here because they voted for us, even though they're already super rich. It doesn't matter whether you take it from the super rich or you take it from the poor or the middle class or anyone. The law does not have that right. Its very purpose is justice. And its justice is to protect the rights. If you have the property over here and you have gained the property through legal means, that is your property, and the purpose of the law, the government, is to protect that right. Protect that right. Okay? Now, if you gained your goods, your property, by taking it from a group over here in an unlawful manner, in an immoral manner, then the purpose of the law is to protect the people over here by taking that back away and giving it back to them and punishing the person on this side. Okay? Punishing the group that immorally, by force, took property. And by force, we don't necessarily just mean you have to take a gun and you walk up to someone and you go, give me all your money. Give me your wallet. Give me your purse. That's not what it means. Okay? You could do it, and today it is more prevalent than ever. In fact, crimes that are by violent in nature have been going down in most areas of the United States over the last decade or so. Except for maybe Chicago, where it's kind of ever present on an upward angle. But the reason for that isn't because crime is going down, it's because what we call white-collar crime is going up. White-collar crime gets its name because it used to be crimes that were generally committed in the early parts of the 19th century by men wearing white collars, businessmen, because they tended to be crimes of deceit, cunning, and fraud. And the businessmen who committed those crimes, the reason they did is because they had the access to be able to commit those types of crimes. So they became known as white-collar crimes. Today, of course, white-collar crimes can be committed by anyone. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a businessman with a white collar on. Someone could be at home in their pajamas on a computer, and they could be committing computer fraud. They could be committing identity theft. They could be committing credit card fraud. And all you need is a computer to do it. So that's why white-collar crime, what we call white-collar crimes, or crimes of cunning and deceit, are much more on the rise because it's much safer to sit at home on a computer and steal people's passwords and identities and to order your Gucci purses and your 40-inch flat screen TVs and to move money from one person's account into your own account on a computer than it is to go out with a gun and hold people up. That doesn't mean that violent crimes don't exist, but they've actually slightly been on the decline over time. So when we talk about taking someone else's goods or property or by force, that does not mean that literally there has to be some force involved. You club someone or grab their purse and run off. All right? It can be done by cunning or deceit as well. Okay, so we've talked about the perversion of law. I'm going to write that on the board. The perversion of law, which is the taking away of other people's life, liberty, or property. And that means that we are not maintaining justice, we're doing the exact opposite. But what are the two things that cause people to pervert the law? And there's two things. Okay? First of all, what Bastiat calls stupid greed. Okay? Stupid greed, which is the easier one to understand, or false philanthropy. Okay, now stupid greed means that people want things for themselves. They're being selfish. It's the green-eyed monster, so to speak, when people talk about getting green with envy. You see someone else has that, you really want it, you can't stop thinking about it, and eventually you go and you take it, you steal it. Little kids take other kids' candy or cookies from the pantry when they're not supposed to be able to. Adults do much worse things. They take other people's monies, cars. Sometimes they even take other people's lives, okay, because they're jealous of them. So that's stupid. He calls that stupid greed. He says it's stupid. Okay, and it is. when you take other people's things, you're only thinking about yourself. And plus, you're not even thinking about yourself, because the fact of the matter is there are consequences for actions. And if people all behaved in that same way, everyone would be trying to take your stuff. And then we'd have no society. We'd go back to living like cavemen and living in anarchy, where everyone's just looking out for themselves. We have no form of order in society. Okay? And so he calls that stupid greed. And that's a little bit easier, more black and white, at least I should say, to say, okay, you got that's bad, right? But false philanthropy, the other way in which the perversion of law occurs, is a little bit more complex, and for our purposes a little bit more important, because most of the time, not always, but most of the time, governments do not, at least in societies where you have a good government in place, they don't all of a sudden go from being a good government to going to like stupid greed. Now, that doesn't mean that doesn't play a part in it. Obviously, you have politicians who get into the system who do things for their own gain only. To get elected the next cycle, that would be stupid greed. Why is that stupid greed? Well, think about this. Politicians are supposed to be our representatives. They're supposed to be thinking about what's best for the people, the good of the people. They're not supposed to be thinking about what's going to get me elected in the next cycle. Because when they do that, they're going to make very short-term bad decisions that are not good for us as the people. That's stupid greed. That does play a part in this. And those are things, though, that everybody, it doesn't matter where you are in the political spectrum, everyone can point to those things and say, that's wrong, right? We shouldn't be doing that. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but that shouldn't be going on. It's a little harder, it's a little bit more complex to understand what false philanthropy is. Because the idea of philanthropy is a good thing, okay? Where you are giving to other people, you're trying to take care of other people, charity, kindness, love. Those are good things, those are virtues. So how can you have false philanthropy? Well, false philanthropy means that someone is going to do something good that they think is good for someone else, but they're going to do it at the expense of another person. Okay? If I have something and I want to give it to another person to help them out, that's philanthropy. False philanthropy is when I say, I want to help that person out, but I'm going to help them out by taking from this person over here and giving it to them. And what are the problems with that? What are the issues that come up with that? You say, well, how is it bad? If as long as the person who we're taking from has a lot, and we give it to a person who doesn't have a lot, how is that bad? How is that bad? How is it that if we take just a little bit from the people who have a lot and give it over here to the people who don't have a lot? What's wrong with that? Why is that false? Those are the questions that we need to pick up with and answer in our next lecture.